Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today to investigate this thing we call apologetics, which is explaining, defending the faith with clarity, charity, confidence, and got a great show in store for you today. Kind of unusual show because we're going to investigate, an area of our faith that I think a lot of people have a lot of trepidation talking about, and that is damnation. And yeah, I know it's tough for it's not exactly a great conversation starter. Let's put it that way. Nevertheless, there's lots of problems and difficulties with this idea that not everybody is going to heaven, and to kind of give us some information on this topic. We're going to have Dr. Paul Thigpen come on the other side of the break. He's going to talk about his book, Saints Who Saw Hell and Other Catholic Witnesses to the Fate of the Damned. So not exactly an upbeat topic, but nevertheless a very important topic because, after all, you can't appreciate, the glories of heaven unless you appreciate also the fate of those who are deprived of it. So we're going to be talking to Dr. Thigpen on the other side of the break, and also we're going to have our Finding of the Fallacy. Finding of the Fallacy today is the genetic fallacy, and also, as always, we meet one of the early church fathers. This early church father, I would venture to say that most Catholics in the pew never heard of him. And I think most Catholics who actually are familiar with the early church fathers probably never noticed them. And that is Macarius of Magnesia. So we're going to learn about Macarius on our Meet the Early Church Fathers segment. And actually, he's a very interesting father. I actually used him for my Hostile Witness books because he touches on some things with some of the greatest enemies of the Catholic Church, Porphyry, the Neo-Platonist. And so we'll talk about him in a little bit. So let's start off our program, however, on a joyful note. So I joyfully welcome all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. And I also welcome all of you listening on radio stations around this great country of ours and also around the world via podcast. And, as always, I know we get a lot of new listeners, a lot of new viewers, so let me just fill you in on all the cool things that you can access. Podcast, if you want to get a copy of this program or any of the other programs we've done, not just Hands-On Apologetics, by the way, but all the great shows that Virgin Most Powerful produces. You can go to our website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And just go to our shows and scroll down either to Hands-On Apologetics or Jesus 911 or Terry and Jesse or all the other great stuff. And bam, you have access to all the programs. You can also do searches too, by the way. I found that out. Or you can download our handy-dandy phone app and take Virgin Most Powerful with you wherever you go. And also you can access all the shows and a lot of free goodies as well through the phone app. So if you don't have it, please get it. And as always, thank you so much for keeping us in your prayers and support. And for those in social media, it's great. You can actually help us and evangelize without spending a cent. And that is just tell your friends about the programs you hear. Share it with us. Like us. We have a channel on YouTube that if you haven't, please subscribe. And if you have subscribed, thank you for doing so, because get enough subscribers, that also helps Virgin Most Powerful Radio. So thank you guys for doing that. I know a lot of you have, and I see the figures. So keep up the great work, sharing this great faith of ours. So why don't we jump to the Finding the Fallacy for today? Finding the fallacy is the genetic fallacy. And by the way, it has nothing to do with genes or biology. This genetic fallacy has to do with sloppy thinking. And what is the genetic fallacy? Well, it's a fallacy of irrelevance that is based solely on someone's or something's history, origin, or source, rather than its current meaning and context. This overlooks any difference that may be found in the present situation and typically transfers a positive or negative esteem from an earlier context. Now, that's kind of, many times with these fallacies, the definition is actually not as clear as an actual example. But to boil it down for you folks, a genetic fallacy is when someone disregards or contests argument simply because of the origin of the argument. Okay? So whatever bad or even positive meaning, it could go the other way, that the source has is kind of transferred to the argument. So, you make a point, a historical fact, for example, and someone says, well, you're Catholic, and, what do you expect Catholics to say? They're trying to defend their faith. They're committing the genetic fallacy because it doesn't matter what the source of it is. What matters is it sound? Does it bear scrutiny? Is there evidence for your position? And is the argument sound? So, be aware of this. This happens a lot, where genetic fallacy tries to, go in the Wayback Machine and kind of poison people's arguments because of the past. And that's not fair. Every argument should be an equal opportunity argument. It should stand and fall on its own feet. And you can't just say because of the source we can dismiss something, or we could affirm it. It could go the other way. So, something to keep in mind. That's the genetic fallacy, our finding the fallacy for today. Why don't we talk about that obscure early church father that I mentioned earlier, and that is Macarius the Magnesian, who flourished sometime in around AD 400. The fathers of the Egyptian desert claimed two Macarii, if you want the plural. Macarius the Egyptian, also known as the Elder or the Great, who was in Upper Egypt, who spent 60 years in the desert of Crete, and Macarius the Alexandrian, called the town man, to distinguish him from the other Egyptian Macarius. He, the Great, was born around the year 300, died around 389. The town man was born a few years before him and died a few years after him, attaining almost the age of 100. So there are two different possible Macariuses that are in church history, but the present Macarius is also known as Magnus, and he's also known as the Magnesian. He's the third Macarius. So the third one is our current church father. Photius says that at the Synod of the Oak in 403 A.D., Macarius, the bishop of Magnesia, was the accuser of Heraclides, whom Chrysostom had consecrated bishop of Ephesus. Presumably Macarius the Magnesian, the author of the answer book, or rather the book called The Only Begotten Christ Himself to the Pagans, is identified with Photius's Macarius, bishop of Magnesia. So, three possible Macariuses out there. It's odd that you would think that's a common name, but apparently it was. And but this one in particular comes from the Church of Magnesia, which, by the way, if you remember, Ignatius of Antioch, in his 7 letters, 6 of them go to churches. One of those churches was the Church of Magnesia. So a very ancient church. Anyway, we have one work from him. It's the answer book, or rather the Only Begotten Christ Himself to the Pagans. The answer book is a Christian apology presented in dialogue form. It represents a fictitious debate of 5 days' duration between Macarius and the philosopher, as the apologist of the work is of no special merit. But its singular importance is in its accurate presentation of pagan objections. So basically, the material, the arguments themselves are okay, but really the most important thing is the accurate presentation of the pagan philosophers' objections. Now, the patrologist Duchesne was of the mind that the pagan position was supplied by a treatise by the Neoplatonists Heraclides, who was the governor of Bithynia, who wrote an anti-Christian work representing Apollonius of Tyana as a magician whose works were superior to those of Jesus, and who investigated the persecution of Diocletian. However, other patrologists identified the philosopher, this pagan opponent in this book, as being none other than the philosopher Porphyry, and reckon that the objections are from Porphyry's lost work of 15 books against the Christians. Now, Porphyry, of course, is one of the most important and able intellectual opponents of Christianity. So it would make sense that he would be the arguments that Macarius would be interacting with. It's probable, according to Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers, that the identification of the philosopher with Porphyry is correct. But unfortunately, Macarius seems to have used not the lost work of Porphyry, but some anonymous epitome of it, which is also lost. So, it is Porphyry, perhaps indirectly through a secondary source. The answer book can be dated only, around 400, somewhere between 390 and 410. Nevertheless, it's a very early book, and although the dialogue itself is fictitious, like I said, nevertheless, it does give us information about Porphyry's argumentation in his lost work. And, I'm going to give you one quote because really all that survives is this, little bits and pieces and fragments of his work. And in it, Macarius says, Christ took the bread and the cup, each in similar fashion, and said, "This is my body and this is my blood." Not a figure of his body or a figure of his blood, as some persons petrified mind would want to rhapsodize, but the truth of the body and the blood, seeing that his body was from the earth and the bread and wine are likewise. And that's Macarius of Magnesian. Coming up next, Dr. Paul Thigpen. Stay tuned.
Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics, and we're going to talk about a subject that I think is probably everybody is a little uncomfortable talking about. It's easy to talk about salvation, but what about damnation? You know, the flip side. If it's lawful and just for those who have departed this life in godliness to receive a reward, well, then what's the flip side for those who don't die in godliness? And, you know, and that's usually a bitter pill for people to swallow. But anyway, to help us better understand this idea of damnation and kind of get some insights into what is the nature of this, we have none other than Dr. Paul Thigpen with us. Dr. Thigpen earned a BA in Religious Studies at Yale University, an MA and PhD of Historical Theology at Emory University. You guys know him as the best-selling author and also award-winning journalist. Dr. Thigpen's published over 35 books and more than 500 journal and magazine articles and over 40 publications, both scholarly and popularly, I guess if that's a word. And we're going to be talking about his book that you can get via Amazon.com. It's called Saints Who Saw Hell and Other Catholic Witnesses to the Fate of the Damned. And Dr. Thigpen, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Great to be here, Gary. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, well, you know, would it be wrong for me to say it's a hell of a subject?
It's true.
Yeah.
Literally true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you know, I love your work. You've really addressed the whole span of, you know, the Christian worldview, and I think of all the areas in Christian teaching, you know, this whole idea of reprobation or damnation, it's just, you know, it's one of those subjects that most people wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. So, you know, I'm just kind of curious, how did you come up with the idea for your book?
Well, golly, the publisher, Tan Books, has had a previous title some years ago called Saints Who Saw Heaven, and you know, has this does kind of collected their claims to private revelation about heaven, but that kind of converged with just the awareness of my own heart, my own life. I've written about hell before. I actually wrote a novel called, the first version it was called Gehenna. The second version, revised, was called My Visit to Hell. It's not my favorite title, but anyway, in which I took Dante's Inferno, the storyline from it, and put it in a modern setting. It starts out in downtown Atlanta, actually, not far from where I live. But you know, since that time, I'd realized that it's a subject that's very important, and yet, as Pope Benedict himself once said, there's not enough is said about it these days. People don't want to talk about it. So, I guess for me, often if there's something that needs to be talked about that many people aren't talking about, even if it's unpopular, I'm willing to look into it to say a few words.
Well, that's awesome. You know, because you know, it is part of our faith. It isn't something that although people may want not to look at it. To me, it makes sense of heaven, because for some reason we think, you know, God rewarding the just is perfectly okay. It's just, it's proper, but God punishing the damned, you know, the godless. For some reason, we have trouble with that other side of the equation.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I say in the book, that we have to understand something about human nature, a basic fact about human nature, and then it begins to make sense. The doctrine of hell, that, and that's the notion of free will, that we believe, you know, firmly believe, it's an essential part of the gospel, that when God created the human race, his desire was not to have robots who could be hardwired to do everything he wanted. He wasn't looking for puppets that he could manipulate for a play he was, you know, putting on. He wanted sons and daughters, beloved sons and daughters whom he could know and love, and could know and love him in return. And to do that, because love is a choice, they had to have free will. They had to be given this immensely high dignity of having a free will, of having a share in his own freedom, which to me is a greater miracle than, you know, one of the stars that he created. To actually have creatures that have a share in his free will. But once you do that, I mean, what does that mean? To have free will means that you can choose your will over the will of another. And as soon as a creature is created with free will, they have a choice. between their own will or the will of God, which, pre-exists in them. And so hell's got to be a possibility right there, because that's what hell is. The Catechism says it's the definitive self-exclusion from the eternal communion with God. That, as C.S. Lewis, Christian writer, once said, the gates of hell are all locked on the inside. We send ourselves there because we choose, we choose ourselves over God. And in the end, he's the source of every good thing. He's the source of all life and joy and peace and grace and holiness, goodness, truth, beauty. If you cut yourself off from that, what you're choosing is hell.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's, Paul calls it the mystery of iniquity. It's, it's hard to wrap our minds around how someone could make that definitive exclusion, cutting themselves off from the source of life and love, but it does happen, doesn't it?
Well, that's the thing, when I first wrestled with that question, because, somebody put it to me, if somebody knows exactly knows what choice would lead to their own eternal happiness, wouldn't they always take it? And I got to thinking about it. I said, well, even in life now, day to day, including ourselves, we know people, including ourselves, who will make choices that they know are not for their best, are not for their happiness, are not for the will of God. And once we do make a choice like that, then as a friend of mine once said, sin makes you stupid, or St. Thomas put it, sin darkens the intellect.
Right.
And so, you think of Lucifer making the choice that he did. How could he ever hope to overthrow God? But once his heart, his pride had arisen, he actually deceived himself, apparently, into thinking that he could do that. So, no, we don't always choose what's for our own happiness and our own good, even in this life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And, there is a kind of self-deception that goes on. Well, let's talk a little bit about, what are the punishments of hell? Do we know what the punishments of hell are?
You always start with Scripture, of course, and Jesus himself had lots to say about hell. There are other places, and in the book I have a whole chapter of that, kind of bringing out all the biblical passages that talk about that. And the language there, used is typically fire and darkness and worms, that kind of thing. And a lot of folks will say, well, that's just figurative language, as if to dismiss it, or to say, therefore, it's not really to import it. It must not be that, so bad. But I think I agree with Lewis again and others that the fact that the language is in some sense figurative, you don't know exactly what it says figurative, but in some sense figurative, most likely, then it doesn't mean that the reality is something not so bad. It means that it's worse. That our Lord was using the language we had and the figures, that would appear to our imagination that press themselves upon us, using those to try to describe a reality whose horror stretches the limits of human language. So it's not that, if it's more figurative than literal, well, it's because our language couldn't bear to describe the literal. So when these, you get those kinds of things, that kind of imagery as well in these visions, but that you also get lots of really good kind of discussion of it by saints like St. Catherine of Siena, St. Teresa of Avila, and others, in which they make clear, and I think it's clear according to our faith, not just because the saints said it, but that there's an external or exterior kind of torment in which the punishment is coming on these, and it's an act of justice that way. But that the much worse torment is an interior torment that comes from the pain of knowing what we've lost, the poena damni, as they call it, the pain of loss. And that in that condition, we'll realize, that there is no more reason for hope, that the God who loved us into existence and cared for us in every way, moment by moment in our life on earth, and who made sent his own son to die for us and gave us the church and the sacraments, every channel of grace, so that we could live with him forever, and that was his desire, that we, by our own choices, have rejected that definitively, irrevocably, forever. and that we did it for the sake of passing pleasures that are now totally gone. And as one writer pointed out, in this life, when we begin to feel the emptiness of having rejected God, at least we can fall back on the almost empty pleasures, that we have. Well, I may not have the peace that comes from being with God, but I've got all this pleasure I've chosen. But in hell, we won't even have that to fall back on. And we'll know that the one who created us and loved us is our eternal enemy now. And then that we will, in the midst of that despair and that hatred, impotent hatred toward God, because we can't do anything toward him, to him, we'll hate the saints and the angels who are his allies and live with him forever. We'll be, envious of them. We'll be surrounded by other people who are all in the same boat. And in that sense, I like to sometimes compare, it's a rough comparison, but hell to a prison for the criminally insane. Imagine, for those who've seen or at least heard of the Silence of the Lambs, the movie, the character Hannibal Lecter, cannibal is just horrible. Imagine being thrown for eternity and to all the other folks who are like that, who want to do the most damage they can to each other forever. So it's just level upon level of torment, inside, outside. Because
that was actually my next question for you. Yeah, that we know that there's levels of glory in heaven. Are there levels of punishment in hell?
There seem to be all the visions that I examined. Excuse me. And again, it is an important point to say that this is private revelation, apart from the scriptures that I referred to, and tradition of the church alluded to in councils and dogmatic definitions, that kind of thing. But the private revelation, we always have to remember we don't put it on the same places. The scripture, don't give it the same, a sense of faith. But that nevertheless, especially when you have something as consistent as these are, that does seem to explain and to build on or develop or illuminate the public revelation we've been given. And I think there's a lot to look at here. But you do have references even in the gospel about some will be beaten with many rods and some with fewer strokes. That could apply perhaps to purgatory, could apply to hell. But certainly the pattern in all of these is that because in many ways the punishment is simply the ripened fruit, you might say, rotten fruit, ripened and rotten fruit of our behavior in this life, that it does have a connection to the particular sins and to the particular degrees of sin.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Well, hear the music coming up. We're chatting with Dr. Paul Thigpen about his book, Saints Who Saw Hell and Other Catholic Witnesses to the Fate of the Damned. Stay tuned, folks. You listen to Hands on Apologetics. I'm Gary McCudden. We'll be right back.
Attention VMPR listeners. We've talked at length about the attack on our youth through popular culture media, but what if I told you there was someone trying to make a difference? The newest novel, Britfield and the Lost Crown, by C.R. Stewart, is reaching schools across America and sharing Christian morals alongside great storytelling. What if I told you that this mission needs your help? To reach more children, Britfield and the Lost Crown need funding for their ongoing book tour. If you're interested in making a difference, if you're interested in buying the book, or are curious and want more information, go to BritfieldInstitute.org. That's BRITFIELD Institute.org. Or email media@britfield.com. Help open up the world of Britfield and the Lost Crown to people everywhere.
Finding the right doctor for your obstetric and gynecological needs can be difficult. Do you want a doctor with impeccable references and ethical practices? One who is trustworthy and well-researched? Dr. Aceta is that doctor. As a faithful Catholic in the Kern County community, Dr. Aceta provides expert care guided by his Catholic teachings, focusing on the patient's needs according to his own specialty. Call Dr. Aceta for all your obstetrics and gynecological needs at 661-595-5617. Again, 661-595-5617 for quality care without compromise.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics. We are chatting with Dr. Paul Thigpen about his book, Saints Who Saw Hell and Other Catholic Witnesses to the Fate of the Damned. And, Doctor, right before the break, you made a really good point that, as we're going to move on and look at private revelation, it's always good to remember that Catholics don't hold private revelation on the same level as public revelation or magisterial teaching, but they do help to illuminate those teachings, especially when you see a common thread that runs through many of these private revelations.
It's true, and these are not the folks that I've chosen to include in the book are not just kind of folks that have, whose only credentials are kind of self-provided. I also put it, folks who just kind of claim I'm a prophet or that kind of thing. We've got plenty of that around these days. But we're talking the main portion of the book is Visions of Saints. So you've got St. John Bosco, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Hildegard of Bingen, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, St. Catherine of Siena, the Children of Fatima, St. Maria Faustina Kowalska, Venerable Maria of Agreda. And then you've got some that saints report from others of their contemporaries that they consider trustworthy. So Pope St. Gregory the Great, St. Bede, St. Alphonsus Liguori reporting a vision of Blessed Richard of St. Anne. So you've got those, then you've got others that are attributed to saints. We don't know, like the Apocalypse of Peter, Apocalypse of Paul, probably not historical documents, but give us evidence of what the early Christian community was believing. And then others from other Catholic visionaries. That's why the subtitle of the book is Other Catholic Witnesses to the Fate of the Damned. And at the end, even a couple of kind of legendary and literary visions. But again, if you look at all these, and we end actually with a final reflection from the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, you do find those patterns, and I think a lot of things are illuminated. So before the break, we were talking about different levels of punishment and hell, that kind of thing. And the clearest example of that is a literary version of that, of Dante's Inferno. But he largely was giving an imaginative form to the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, actually. And so part of the notion there is that there are sins that are more serious than others. That's the whole notion of mortal sin as opposed to venial sin. But also, if you were to look at a map kind of Dante's vision of hell, literary vision of hell, you see that there's some sins that sins of the flesh. So though according to the Children of Fatima, Our Lady said that that's probably the most common, or that's the most common reason why people end up in hell. But those things, at a certain level, as serious as they are, and they can still take you to hell, they don't have the malice that you have when you get lower. In the lower portions of hell, where people are not just sinning deeply, gravely, morally by lusting after something that in itself is a good thing, but more in an illicit way. But what they're actually doing is they're intending harm toward others. So sins of violence, sins of fraud, because you use the highest part of your human nature, your rational soul, in order to be involved in the sin. And then sins more serious because they're in the sense that who it is that you're sinning against. So that if you were to, if you slap a friend, that's one thing. You slap your grandmother, that's another. You try to slap God in the face, that's another. And so you betray a mother or father, that's terrible. But what if you betray the Son of God? And so in his vision, Judas, of course, is down at the bottom. But it's, again, now that was a literary vision, but it's still a point that you see in the others, that sins themselves have different kind of qualities and kinds of seriousness. And though they can lead ultimately there, the kind of, I want to say fruit, but it's rotten fruit that they bear inside of us. They bear within themselves a certain kind of torment and disorder. Maybe that's the best word for it, disorder that causes torment. And so in hell, the pattern is you see all these suffering in somewhat different, torments, because the sins that brought them there are different kinds of disorder. Nevertheless, in the end, they all do partake of the same torment of despair. That this is something we could have avoided and did not.
Right. Yeah, very good. Just looking at your book, I was surprised. I think, while we were emailing, I said, the only ones I could really think of off the top of my head were the children of Fatima receiving a vision of hell. And then, just before the show, I remembered, John Bosco did too. But I didn't realize how many saints and reported visions of saints there were.
Well, it amazed me too when I first started researching the book, and again, not just of what the saints themselves saw, but they reported from eyewitnesses. Mm-hmm. For instance, Pope St. Gregory the Great, all the way back in the 6th century. So this is pretty early on. Roman Empire's followed about and fallen down all around him, and one of the things he does in his dialogues is to record testimonies given to him by reliable sources of all kinds of things. So, such as, for instance, apparitions of departed souls, but also of visions of hell. And so, this is a lot. In fact, I don't want to get too much into it, but the notion that hell could be empty, that certainly would be something that St. Gregory the Great would say, no, I don't think so. Because he reports visions, he and others, indeed, of people who saw particular folks in hell that they knew or knew about, and did not at all shrink away from that. He seemed to accept that was the reality. So we need to at least keep in mind that some of the greatest teachers of the church would look at that and say, no, that's not at all what we think.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, why don't you take us through some of the saints? We have about 5 minutes or so maybe we could start off with a couple of them.
Well, you mentioned St. John Bosco, closer to our time. Nobody can say that his vision it's a dream, but when he reports a dream, it's not like the kind of dreams that, we normally think about. It's rational rather than irrational like most dreams are. He actually has dialogues, intelligent dialogues with the characters in the dream. But anyway, so many of his visions, almost all of them, I think, had to do with the boys that he cared for. He established an order to care for boys who needed homes. And he was always concerned about their salvation. And he saw many of them in this particular dream, and went back to warn them about it. And that's another pattern you actually see in here. When people say, well, why would God even allow folks to see hell? Wouldn't that just be a terrifying thing and no, not fruitful? But no, it actually is fruitful. In some cases, the person, him or herself, who saw it was in need of being warned that hell was real. In some cases, they came back in order to testify to other people that hell is real. In this case, they were being warned. He was being warned to warn his boys, his wards. In the case of the children of Fatima, you get a warning from Our Lady. Are allowed to see it. So, and then she tells them, pray for sinners who are on their way to hell, or bound that direction. And so you get this beautiful little Saint Jacinta, little girl out there, shepherd girl. On hot summer days, she's for hours. Her comrades said that she would be on her knees praying for the souls that they would not go to hell. So there are reasons like that you see in patterns through these as well, why God would reveal these things to us.
Yeah.
And Catherine,
especially...
I'll just say, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, especially for saints, that he would do so for, holy people that, weren't on their way to hell, that they would see it.
And like St. Teresa of Avila, for instance, what she was shown in particular was the place that the demons had prepared in hell for her if they could get her there. And so that was just a real sobering thing for her. And it was horrible. It was like being closed in, almost suffocated in a closet where she could hardly breathe, and all kinds of other things going on too. But and so for her, it was kind of a way too of, and you get this pattern of God showing her what would have happened apart from his salvation, his rescue, his redemption of her, his grace, so that she could praise him for his grace ever more fervently, because she saw what she had escaped. And that's the same for us too, I think.
Yeah, boy, that's a sobering thought. It's almost like what was that? I think of the name. It's a Christmas Story with the ghost of from the past and present.
Oh, yeah,
future.
Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Yeah, it's almost like
right.
Yeah, this is what could have been. If you don't change, except in her case, that's what could have been. Had God not reached out to her in grace.
Yeah, and I think in her case, even she would have been aware that if she still had her free will, she could still turn away and end up there. But still, for the rest of her life, it gave her such a more powerful sense of praise and thanksgiving to God for his salvation, for his redemption, for his grace.
Yeah, very good. So these the visions of hell given to saints, they're purposeful. It's not just God trying to scare them or shock them or something like that, but it's for their own good, or especially for others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right, and that's a good thing, and that's one reason why I've now taken those recorded visions and put them together in this book, because they can warn me, they can warn others as well, and remind us what it is we have to avoid, but also thank God again for what He's done to give His own Son for us, so that we could avoid it. We appreciate heaven all the more when we realize how horrible it would have been without heaven to have gone the opposite way. It's a good thing for us. It's a good reminder to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that's during Lent. We focus on the last things, and it's kind of a reality check. Where our possible destination could be. Yes,
it is. And surveys have shown that the majority of Americans, most of the surveys I've seen, actually believe that there is a hell. And you think, okay, well, you'd expect people to be talking about it more and it to be shaping their lives more, but it doesn't seem to. Well, what's the reason? Well, then you see other surveys that show that even of the people who do believe in hell, only a small fraction think they have any possibility of going there. Okay, there's the problem. Yeah, we need to be open to these possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hear the music coming up, and we're talking with Dr. Paul Thigpen. We'll be coming up on the other side of the break to pick up the conversation of saints who've seen hell and other witnesses to the damned. So stay tuned, folks. You're listening to Apologetics.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony, and I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Dr. Paul Thigpen about the topic of damnation and his book, Saints Who Saw Hell and Other Catholic Witnesses to the Fate of the Damned. And Dr. Thigpen, you were just talking before the break about, it's John Bosco, St. Therese, the Children of Fatima, even Gregory the Great. It's amazing how many witnesses you were able to put together for your book.
Well, too, I mean, in places that we might, kind of given the modern mindset, find surprising. St. Maria Faustina Kowalska, what is her nickname? The Apostle of Mercy, right? And she is. We're right now getting ready to celebrate the Feast of the Divine Mercy, and my wife and I are joining many others around the world in praying the Divine Mercy Novena these days. So what would be, at least to the modern mindset, what would be more surprising than to have St. Faustina talking about hell in a vision? But she does. Because it's the rest of the good news. I mean, it's the good news is that God's given us free will and has redeemed us to heal us and all those things, but that He doesn't force anyone in the end to receive His forgiveness. He can't. It wouldn't be forgiveness. Then it would just be a rewiring of our brains or something. And so you find things like that. You find a really interesting one to me was St. Hildegard of Bingen, who's writing this. She's one of the more recently canonized saints, and she always had many intriguing visions. But she talks about a monster who looked like a worm, and one of the reasons I included her vision was that it's kind of the clearest, most striking image of the devil that we get in any of these visions. So she does talk about some about the damned themselves, but what I found most interesting and quoted in the book was that she said that what you found there was this huge monster that looked like a worm, and the monster, there was the devil, and it had segments of its body, and it had spikes, all kinds of things. And very interesting that the head of it was badly crushed. It was still alive, but was badly crushed. And immediately, if you think about it, right, okay, why would he do that? Because of, crushed under the gospel. That's right. And so beautiful things, but, trying to, and how in the end, then the angels and saints come and tread on it, all of them together. Our Lady was the first in that regard, and our Lord. But what a beautiful, powerful reminder of us that he's chained at the bottom of hell, that he is chained, and that in the end he will be totally quarantined. To use a popular word right now, be totally quarantined and will no longer be able to do ill to anyone, evil to anyone.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is remarkable. Of course, the devil is, the devil is not material; it's an immaterial being. So, I imagine with these visions that they have to be symbolic or representing different features of that being, right? We kind of have to. They still require some interpretation. In other words.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. In fact, and it's not a new point. All the way back in the 6th century, St. Gregory the Great that I mentioned, when he's reporting these visions, he has someone in dialogue who says, well, when you show a vision that has like a murky river and a brick wall and stuff, does that mean there's actually a brick wall in hell, that kind of thing? And he says, no, that these are kind of images that God used in order to get the truth across to those who are receiving the visions in the most vivid and clear way. But again, you can't just dismiss it and say, okay, it was just imagery. Just like in the fire and the worms and the darkness that talked about in Scripture, the imagery is there because this horrific stuff we're stretching the limits of language to be able to describe it. So yes, we don't look at it as hell has a compartment that looks like this and has a compartment that looks like that, but rather that the impression that the image makes on us should be one that sticks with us and causes us to turn toward God and away from that.
Yeah, that's true. So, these private revelations are given so that we have a triptych or something like that, of how hell is laid out in, the different features. It's more to express spiritual truths.
It's like I once said when I read the book about hell years ago, the novel. I said I had an introduction where he said, "Now, please don't think that I'm following Dante's storyline, that with these different circles of hell and stuff that I'm somehow trying to offer you literal details of how hell is laid out. That would be like saying that the parable of the Good Samaritan is supposed to be a map of the road to Jericho. That's not the point. It's not some literal map of what things are, but it is supposed to make the main point of this is the way you want to go and that's the way you don't want to go."
Yeah, that's a good illustration too. And unfortunately, nowadays, people aren't used to thinking that way. So when they run across, especially those who don't have faith, non-believers, when they run into something that's symbolic, but talking about something that's real, they really have a trouble translating, symbols to pointing to the real.
Yeah, and kind of the opposite. Either they'll, dismiss it altogether, but they'll say it's not even true, or they will say that, like I said about others, that since it's only figurative language, as if that's a minimum kind of thing, then we don't really have to. The literal is not so bad, but no, it's supposed to point us in the direction of something beyond language, really. Yeah,
very good. So, okay. You pointed out the ones that really stuck with you. Earlier you said that there is a kind of, as you were putting together all these different witnesses, that you were starting to see some commonality between them. Maybe we could flush that out a little bit. What do all these different visions have in common in regards to the vision of hell?
I think we've mentioned some. Most of them do have somewhere in them the same imagery that we find in Scripture of darkness, of fire, of worms. The worm referring to fire, kind of obvious to everybody. It seems we're talking about pain, severe pain. But worms, why worms? Why is that part of this language? And in Scripture, the word Gehenna that eventually comes by New Testament times to mean hell, to be a figurative name for hell, actually originally applied to Gehinnom, a valley outside of Jerusalem, that at one point early on in Israel's history, when they went after fake gods, false gods, they would burn their children in fire as a sacrifice to Moloch, to one of the pagan gods of the Canaanites. And eventually, when they came out of that horrible time, that valley was just held in such disrespect, such horror, that they turned it into their garbage dump and began to dump their garbage there. And then there would be a fire that would be going constantly there, burning up the garbage. So all of a sudden, the worm imagery begins to make sense along with the fire, not just that the fire, but that there were worms there that were constantly eating the rotten meat and other kinds of stuff that were there. But the church fathers looked at that, and I think saints have since then, the notion of how a worm slowly eats on you or eats on a body, that the worm represents that interior pain. And that's one of the other patterns we mentioned, not just an exterior pain that comes to us, but an interior pain, the remorse, well, not remorse, just regret, because remorse would mean you're sorry you did it, but the regret of conscience saying, gosh, I could have avoided all this. It's all my fault, and I have no hope at all. So you get that kind of that pattern where they're saying it's not just punishment imposed from the outside, but again and again, it's what's going on the inside that's worse. That in certain ways the punishment ends up fitting the crime because it is the ripened fruit of that particular kind of disorder. That the people there chose to go there in their own way, rather than God just throwing them there. You get patterns about the warning that we've mentioned, that you if you've been allowed to see this, you're supposed to tell others so that you can warn them about it, or you yourself are supposed to change your way of living. You see patterns, too, just of God's justice, you started the program talking about that, and that there is a sense in which, yes, along with being merciful, God is also just. And we cannot dismiss that or deny that that's a part of what it means to be God, to be good.
Yeah, very good. Wow, I tell you, I learned a lot from this program. I'm so glad that you're able to come on and walk us through this uncomfortable subject, but nevertheless, it's fascinating. Thank you so much for writing that book. By the way, where can people go to not only get this book, but all the others? You have over 35 books. I know you have an awful lot.
Actually, I have 54 now. That was
54.
Yeah, it was some dated information. Yeah, 54. Number 54. A couple of children's books just came out recently. And believe me, they're not about hell. That's okay. There actually was a child's book about hell that came out in the 1800s in America. That's terrifying. But the ones that you can get them at your local Catholic bookstore. Always encourage you to buy there. Once the quarantine's over, I suppose. You can get pretty much all of them unless they're out of print on Amazon.com, but also from the particular publisher. And this particular publisher is Tan Books, so I also urge you to go there to buy from them. This one and a number of other books like Manual for Spiritual Warfare, Saints Who Battled Satan, are available from Tan. But then a number of other books from other publishers. You can go to Amazon or to those publishers' websites.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and please do, because Dr. Thigpen, you've written some great works, and I know over the years I have profited a lot through your writing. So please keep up the great work. That's
so encouraging. Thank you for your kind words, brother, and thank you for your work, man. This radio program and so much else. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm a fool here to try to help bring intelligent people like you before our audience. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the program. So that is Dr. Paul Thigpen, ladies and gentlemen. And check it out. You can go to Tan Books. You can also, if you want, you can go to Amazon. There's a ton of works by him. Check it out, buy them, and buy this book about saints who saw hell. It's a sobering thought, but also very informative. Wow, I can't believe the hour has flown. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights. But never fear, the Terry and Jesse show will soon be here. High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you. And it's time for me to say goodbye. God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. And I hope everybody has a wonderful, healthy, blessed day. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.